You wake before sunrise with your bowels already warning you. Not with a gentle ache, but with a cramped, twisting urgency that makes your whole middle feel knotted. The room around you is still dark, still damp, still holding the stale warmth of too many sleeping bodies. Straw rustles nearby. Somebody coughs from the other side of the wall, deep and wet, then spits into a corner. You are barefoot before you are fully conscious, one hand against the timber frame to steady yourself, the other pressed hard against your stomach. Because in this town, even the simple act of relieving yourself has to be rushed like a military retreat. The toilet is not a private sanctuary. It is not clean porcelain, not water-sealed, not cut off from the rest of life by pipes and disinfectant and the comforting lie that waste disappears when you stop looking at it. Here, your body does not produce something distant and manageable. It produces danger. It joins the great human rot already collecting beneath floors, behind walls, under seats, inside pits, and along the open edges of streets where rain never quite washes anything away. You duck into the privy and the smell hits before your eyes adjust. It is thick enough to feel chewable. Ammonia bites first, sharp and bitter, then the sweeter, fouler note of decay underneath, as if fruit had been left to rot inside a slaughterhouse. The boards beneath your feet are damp. The wood around the seat is polished by generations of hands and thighs, but sticky in places where moisture never really dries. Flies stir in the gloom. Something moves below. Rats, most likely. Or just the shifting surface of everyone else's leaving settling into itself. Then comes the most medieval detail of all. You cannot simply sit and relax. You have to trust the structure. You have to trust the plank under your weight, the joinery, the rotting beams, the distance between your body and the waste pit below. You have to lower yourself over a hole that has been used by your family, your neighbors, travelers, laborers, children with fevers, men with stomach flux, women recovering from birth, people whose names you know, people who died last week, people who may have carried more than ordinary filth out of their bodies. Your knees ache as you crouch. Your nose tries to stop working. Your eyes water anyway. The cold air on your skin does nothing to cut the heat rising from below. It comes up from the pit like breath. You hear a splash, but not from your own body. Something has dropped somewhere in the darkness underneath, or something alive has slipped through the sludge. The sound is enough to make your shoulders tighten. You grip the rough seat to keep from slipping. This is the part modern fantasies leave out. Not the castle walls, not the candles, not the wool cloaks and church bells, but this, the daily surrender of the human body to a system that barely contains what it produces. The truth is not that medieval people were foolish or lazy or unaware that filth was unpleasant. The truth is worse. They lived close to waste because they had to, because towns were crowded, because pits had to go somewhere, because emptying them was foul, expensive, and dangerous work, because the body never stops producing what the world least wants to keep. And in a place like this, survival begins badly. Before breakfast, before work, before prayer, before the market even opens. It begins with your hand on damp wood and your lungs full of air that has already passed over waste. Mold, damp straw, unwashed cloth, and the sleeping mouths of the sick. It begins with the knowledge that what leaves your body does not leave your life. It stays near you, beneath you, around you, waiting in the dark with the flies. You step back into town carrying the smell with you. That is one of the first humiliations of daily life in medieval Europe. The toilet does not end when you leave the seat. It clings to your hands, your sleeves, the hem of your tunic, the leather of your shoes. It rides with you into the lane and mixes with everything else already waiting there. Wet hay, horse dung, fish scales, smoke from low fires, brewing ale, blood from a butcher's block. The sour steam of too many people living too close together. By the time the morning fully opens, the whole town seems to breathe through one large diseased mouth. The street is narrow enough that neighbors can lean from opposite windows and trade gossip without raising their voices. That also means whatever is thrown from those windows does not travel far. Slops, chamber pot waste, dirty wash water, kitchen scraps, spoiled broth, and the contents of a sick room all descend into the same public space where feet, carts, dogs, pigs, and children already compete for room. The ground under you is not a surface in the modern sense. It is a layered paste of mud, straw, ash, dung, spilled ale, and things less identifiable the longer they have soaked together. You watch your footing, not because you fear embarrassment, but because a slip means carrying part of the street home on your skin. Homes offer no real refuge. In many towns, several people sleep in a single room, sometimes several families under one roof, with animals housed close for warmth or convenience. Privacy is scarce, ventilation is poor, and every domestic task happens within arm's reach of something unpleasant. Food is stored near bedding, tools are passed from hand to hand. Laundry dries slowly in smoky air. A child with diarrhea may share a bench with a grandmother sorting onions. A laborer returns from emptying pits or hauling hides and sits near the same fire where supper will be cooked. Nothing is isolated because almost nothing can be. The market only tightens the circle. You touch the same counter others touched after wiping noses, handling poultry, lifting skirts out of muck, scratching flea bites, or carrying chamber pots to a backyard trench. The butcher grips meat with hands that have handled coin. The baker serves loaves from baskets that sit in open air where dust, insects, and breath drift freely. A customer before you coughs into his palm, then reaches for the same cup at the ale stall. Another spits beside the cart wheel and wipes his mouth with the back of his wrist before passing change. Nobody pauses because pausing would mean hunger, lost trade, wasted daylight, and trouble at home. You cannot simply avoid the crowd. The poor cannot retreat to country estates. Craftsmen cannot abandon workshops. Servants cannot stop serving. Women still have to fetch water, wash cloth, prepare meals, care for children, and carry waste away from the house. Laborers still lift timber, turn soil, shovel dung, and repair the same streets that swallow filth faster than they can be cleaned. Even the better off remain bound to other people through rents, deliveries, trade, church, and the rhythms of urban life. To live in town is to live by contact, doors, rope handles, buckets, stair rails, market sacks, shared benches, and public wells all remind you that your world is built on repeated touch. And touch is not a choice reserved for moments of comfort. It is the price of staying fed, housed, clothed, employed, married, and tolerated. You push through bodies because the lane is too tight. You borrow tools because tools are expensive. You help lift a cart because the cart blocks the street. You take coin that passed through 10 hands before yours. You steady yourself against walls damp with old moisture and new stains. You carry water in vessels scrubbed as best anyone can manage, then set them beside barrels, baskets, and chamber pots in homes where space is always short and separation is a luxury. This is what makes medieval filth so relentless. It is not only the presence of waste, it is the way waste is woven into ordinary life so tightly that nobody can completely step around it. Every chore presses you back into it. Every hour requires some new contact with mud, wood, cloth, skin, or shared air. Survival depends on continuing anyway, with cracked hands, tired legs, and a nose that learns to endure what the body never truly accepts. By midday, hunger becomes stronger than disgust. That is one of the cruelest facts of life in a medieval town. You may know the world around you is dirty. You may smell the ditch beside the lane, see the flies on the stall, notice the murky ring inside the water bucket, and still your stomach will force the decision your mind resists. You eat because not eating is its own road to weakness, fever, and an early grave. Bread is your first hope, and often your first compromise. It looks solid, dependable, moral almost, the kind of food that should anchor a life. Yet even bread carries the marks of the world that made it. Grain may have been stored in damp spaces where rot crept in and vermin gnawed through sacks. Flour can be milled in places where dust, insects, and dirt settle into everything. The loaf reaches you through hands that have loaded carts, handled coin, scratched rashes, wiped noses, and done a dozen other tasks since dawn. You tear into it anyway, because stale bread is still better than an empty belly. And because the body cannot live on caution alone, water is worse, precisely because you need it so badly. The town, well, may seem like a blessing until you think about what surrounds it. Waste pits leak. Runoff moves where gravity tells it to move. Rain stirs the contents of streets and yards into slurry. And what the ground absorbs does not vanish in any magical sense. A bucket lowered into questionable water still comes up looking clear enough some days, especially in dim light, especially when thirst is already working on your judgment. You lift it, smell a faint earthiness, perhaps something sour beneath that, and tell yourself it will do because it must do. Ale often feels safer, not because it is pure in any modern sense, but because brewing transforms water into something more stable and more trusted. Small beer, weak but common, becomes the drink of daily endurance. Children may drink it. Workers certainly do. It offers calories, familiarity, and a little relief from the suspicion that lurks in every cup of plain water. But even ale lives in barrels, jugs, and cups that travel through crowded hands and smoky rooms. A shared cup does not belong to one mouth. It belongs to all the mouths before yours. Cracked lips, bad teeth, fevered gums, lingering sickness, and all. Then there is the food itself as it moves through space. Cheese wrapped in cloth, salted fish laid out for sale, porridge stirred with utensils used for other meals and rinsed in water that may already be tired from previous use. Onions, leeks, beans, and cabbage hauled in baskets that sat on muddy ground. Meat, if you are lucky enough to afford it. Presents another gamble. Freshness has to be judged quickly. Smell becomes a daily science. Salt and smoke help, but they also hide as much as they preserve. You learn to cut away suspicious edges. Chew slowly and hope your body forgives what your standards cannot afford to reject. Storage inside the home offers no perfect defense. Food may sit near bedding, ash, tools, or household waste simply because there is nowhere else to put it. Mice find sacks. Insects find crumbs. Cats help. Sometimes. Dogs help themselves. A bowl left covered is still part of the same air breathed by sleepers, workers, and the sick. The kitchen is not a sealed chamber of cleanliness. It is a working corner of a crowded life. So you survive by accepting risks that no sane person would choose freely. You drink the ale, break the loaf, dip from the pot, and pass the cup because the alternative is not safety. The alternative is hunger, thirst, and the kind of weakness that makes every other danger come faster. In medieval Europe, food and drink do not promise health. They merely offer you another day in a world where even nourishment has to be wrestled from contamination. By afternoon, the town is full of remedies. Not real safety, not control in the modern sense, but gestures against helplessness. The human mind can tolerate filth more easily than uncertainty. So people reach for whatever promises order. A sprig of rosemary tucked into a sleeve. Vinegar on a cloth held near the nose. bundles of herbs hung by the bed, smoke from juniper, sage, or damp straw drifting through rooms in the hope that corruption in the air might be chased out by stronger smells. A prayer said with particular concentration, a charm worn against the skin, a visit to someone known for poultices, prayers, or both. This is where modern smugness usually enters the story, and it deserves some restraint. Medieval people were not uniformly filthy, ignorant, or indifferent to cleanliness. Many washed when they could. Hands, faces, and linens mattered. Bathing existed. Public bathhouses existed in some places and periods. Soap existed in various forms. People understood that foul smells, visible dirt, and decaying matter were bad signs. They cleaned homes, swept floors, emptied chamber pots, changed straw, laundered cloth, and tried to keep order within the limits of money, time, fuel, weather, and water supply. The problem was not that they had no concept of hygiene. The problem was that the world around them made true separation from contamination almost impossible. Even washing could become compromised. Water had to be fetched, carried, heated, and reused. A basin for hands might also serve another task before the day ended. Towels were cloth, and cloth held dampness. Shared households meant shared objects, shared benches, shared bedding, shared labor. Cleanliness was not a switch you flipped. It was a temporary and fragile condition that cost effort to create and vanished quickly in cramped spaces. Medical theory did not help much. Many people believed illness spread through corrupted air, imbalance within the body, divine judgment, or malignant influence from outside nature. In that framework, their solutions made a terrible kind of sense. If foul air sickened you, then perfume, herbs, incense, and smoke felt protective. If the body was out of balance, then purging, bloodletting, sweating, or carefully adjusted foods seemed rational. If God permitted suffering, then confession, fasting, almsgiving, and processions became acts of survival as much as devotion. So you might find yourself opening a vein, not because you enjoy misery, but because someone with authority believes excess blood is feeding your fever. You might swallow bitter mixtures of vinegar, honey, crushed herbs, or mineral compounds that sting the tongue and unsettle the stomach. You might sit in a room hazed with smoke until your eyes burn and your chest tightens, telling yourself the heaviness proves the treatment is working. You might pin your hopes to a relic, a saint's day, a whispered formula, or a physician whose robe is cleaner than his outcomes. Some remedies offered comfort without cure. Herbal infusions could soothe a throat or settle a stomach. Washing and linen changes really could reduce grime and improve daily life. Ventilation sometimes helped a room feel less oppressive. Certain practical habits made bodies a little safer, or at least less miserable. But the deeper danger remained untouched because nobody yet had the tools to see it clearly. A flea in bedding, bacteria in water, residue on a shared surface. Contaminated cloth passed from one pair of hands to another. These things did not announce themselves as villains. They hid inside ordinary objects and ordinary acts. Fear of bad air also produced its own ironies. A room that smelled terrible might be fumigated with smoke until it became barely breathable. A sick person might be surrounded by strong scents, heavy blankets, and closed shutters to preserve warmth or block imagined corruption, while the space itself grew more stale and oppressive. Bloodletting weakened bodies already under strain. Strong purges emptied the gut of people who could scarcely afford to lose strength. The search for protection often consumed the very reserves that survival required. So you keep trying. You wash when there is water. You rub herbs between your fingers and inhale them like hope. You trust smoke. Prayer, soap, amulets, warm broth, and old advice because the alternative is to stand still and admit you are living in a world where effort may not save you. That is the most brutal lesson of medieval hygiene and medicine. People were not doing nothing. They were doing many things. They were simply fighting with the wrong map in a landscape that could kill through the smallest unnoticed contact. By evening, the town begins to feel less like a place where people live and more like a system for passing death from body to body. Not openly, not dramatically at first, but through the same objects and creatures that make ordinary life possible. A wool blanket, a shared bench, a flea hidden in straw, a tunic taken from a dead man because cloth is too valuable to bury, a chamber pot carried out with tired hands, a privy seat still damp from the last body that used it. Disease does not need a grand entrance. It only needs repetition. The medieval toilet belongs to that repetition, not always as the direct source of plague in the simple way modern imagination might picture it, but as part of the crowded ecology of filth, vermin, and contact that allows sickness to thrive. Waste pits attract insects, urban grime shelters fleas and rats, damp wood, rotting thatch, and cluttered corners create havens for creatures small enough to ignore and numerous enough to matter. In a town where animals, garbage, standing moisture, food scraps, laundry, and human waste all mingle within a confined space, the boundary between private necessity and public danger disappears. You lower yourself onto a privy seat and your skin touches wood, polished by generations of use. Beneath you, the pit shifts with rot. Around you, the air hangs close and warm with decomposition. Fleas do not care that you are trying to preserve your dignity. They care about blood and opportunity. Rats do not care that this is a domestic corner of life. They care that the town feeds them by accident every day. A toilet, then, is not only a hole for waste. It is a meeting point between body, vermin, moisture, and neglect. When plague enters such a place, it rarely announces its logic clearly. Medieval people saw its results far more easily than its root. A neighbor who seemed tired yesterday is feverish today. By tomorrow he cannot stand. Soon there is pain in the groin, armpit, or neck where the lymph nodes swell into hard, burning lumps. His skin grows hot, then clammy. His thoughts loosen. He speaks strangely, or not at all. Some vomit, some cough, some drift into stupor. Some die so quickly it feels less like an illness than a snatching away. You watch for patterns because the mind needs patterns. The woman who handled a sick child now lies under blankets herself. The man who stripped bedding from a corpse begins to shiver. The servant who slept in a crowded loft wakes with pain in the side and a darkening look around the eyes. Someone blames foul air. Someone else blames sin. Another swears the foreigners brought it. Another says it rose from the ground. And beneath all those explanations, life continues to provide fresh chances for disease to move. Bedding is especially treacherous. Straw mattresses are not innocent things. They collect sweat, skin, fleas, lice, dampness, and whatever else the body sheds in weakness or pain. Blankets are shared, reused, inherited, borrowed, taken from houses emptied by death because cloth is expensive and grief does not cancel poverty. A bed where a feverish person lay becomes, in practical terms, part of the next person's life unless someone has both the knowledge and means to destroy or thoroughly cleanse what remains. Often they do not. So the bed stays. The body changes. The danger lingers. Clothing does the same work more quietly. Wool cloaks, linen shifts, caps, belts, and shoes move between bodies through charity, theft, trade, or household necessity. The dead leave behind garments. The living need garments. In hard times, sentiment loses to survival. You shake out a tunic, sniff it, perhaps rub it with herbs or hold it near smoke, and pull it on because being half-clothed is its own misery. Yet cloth carries history in a way the eye cannot read. Fleas, dirt, bodily fluids, and the stubborn residue of sickness do not vanish because the fabric changed owners. Corpses change the mood of the town completely. Death in small numbers can be ritualized. Death in waves overwhelms ritual itself. Bells ring too often. Carts appear too frequently. Graves are dug with haste. The dead lie in houses for hours or days, depending on labor and fear. Family members wash them, touch them, wrap them, kiss them goodbye, or avoid them with a guilt that settles in later. Priests visit, neighbors help, or they do not. In every case, the body that was once loved becomes a problem of flesh, time, and limited space. Some forms of plague likely moved most efficiently through fleas carried by rats or people's own clothing and bedding. Some outbreaks may also have involved forms that spread through respiratory droplets, especially when coughing entered the picture. Historians still debate the exact balance in every place and every wave, and that caution matters. But from your place inside the town, the distinction offers little comfort. Whether the threat rides on vermin, cloth, breath, or a combination of them, the result is the same. Nearness becomes lethal. Care becomes dangerous. Routine becomes the mechanism of catastrophe. And plague does not strike everyone with equal justice. The poor are cornered by it. They live where the walls are thinner, the floors are dirtier, the bedding is older, and the chance to withdraw is almost non-existent. Their work keeps them in contact with waste, goods, bodies, and public spaces. They cannot afford fresh linen, private rooms, or the luxury of discarding contaminated belongings. Women who care for children, wash the sick, prepare bodies, and manage household filth meet danger at intimate range. Laborers who dig, haul, clean, and bury meet it in public view. Children meet it simply by being small and close to everyone. Then comes the speed, which is what truly breaks morale. A person can go from uneasy to ruined with terrifying efficiency. One day there is only fatigue. The next there is fever, pain, swelling, confusion, perhaps blood in sputum or dark blotches on the skin. The house fills with the smell of sweat, waste, smoke, vinegar, and panic. Someone fetches help. Someone prays. Someone refuses to enter. Someone already exposed says it is too late to fear now. By the time decisions are made, the illness has often already chosen its own course. That is how death moves through town. Not as a dramatic army marching through the gate, but as 1,000 private contacts that nobody can fully avoid. A hand on a rail, a flea in a blanket, a child climbing into a parent's bed, a corpse dressed for burial, a privy humming with flies in the dusk. The medieval toilet does not kill by itself like a villain in a morality play. It belongs to the wider machinery of crowding, contamination, and vermin that turns ordinary survival into constant exposure. In that machinery, every need of the body becomes one more opening through which death can enter. Night brings no relief, only quieter forms of fear. Darkness softens the outlines of the town, but not the knowledge inside it. You begin to suspect every object has a memory of other hands. The latch on the door, the blanket at your feet, the stool by the fire, the cup left drying on the shelf, even the privy path outside, worn into the dirt by generations of urgent footsteps, starts to feel less like a convenience than a trail of exposure repeated so many times that nobody can fully imagine another way to live. Fear changes behavior in small, ugly increments. A mother hesitates before touching a child's forehead. A husband watches his wife cough and measures the distance between sympathy and self-preservation. Neighbors who once shared tools now leave them at thresholds. Conversations shorten, faces turn away. charity becomes selective, then strained, then exhausted. Every kindness begins to feel like a wager placed against one's own body. Yet people cannot stop needing one another. That is what makes the isolation so cruel. The elderly still need water carried, infants still need cleaning, the sick still soil bedding, cry out, vomit, and shake through the night. Someone has to empty the pail. Someone has to lift the body. Someone has to scrape filth from the boards, wash cloth in cold water, fetch broth, hold a head upright, or sit in a room where the air seems heavy with sickness and prayer. Caregiving becomes an act of love that is also an act of exposure. The burden does not fall evenly. Women often bear the nearest work of the body, the wiping, washing, feeding, and carrying that keeps a household functioning even when it is failing. Poor laborers face another form of entrapment. They cannot seal themselves indoors because hunger waits there too. Children have the least understanding and the least power. They crawl onto laps, share bedding, cry without restraint, and touch everything adults have learned to fear. The very young and the very old become symbols of helplessness in a world already running short on mercy. There are also the people who vanish socially before they die physically. The servant too sick to work, the widow with no strong family near, the ditch digger everyone notices only when graves need opening, the washerwoman whose hands are always in other people's dirt, the night soil carriers, pit emptiers, and cleaners who perform the labor most necessary and most despised. Medieval life depends on them, yet dignity rarely follows necessity. They are asked to handle what others cannot bear to look at, then blamed for living too close to it. This constant suspicion changes identity itself. You're no longer simply a baker, apprentice, mother, porter, child, or priest. You become a possible source, a possible victim, a body under observation for signs of failure. Every cough invites interpretation. Every missed meal attracts concern. Every swelling, rash, faintness, or silence makes people recalculate their distance from you. The self shrinks under that gaze. Personhood thins. Survival becomes less about living well than about not becoming untouchable before your heart has even stopped. And still, forgotten lives continue to move through the dark. A child sleeping on old straw, a caregiver rinsing cloth until her fingers ache, a laborer too tired to wash thoroughly before lying down, a widow sitting beside a dying relative because leaving would feel worse than risk. None of them control the sanitation of the town, the crowding of the lanes, or the invisible agents moving through cloth and vermin and breath. They simply endure the cost. In that endurance, medieval Europe reveals one of its hardest truths. Fear isolates, but need keeps dragging human beings back into one another's arms. By the time you understand this world clearly, the hardest truth is no longer the smell. It is the structure. Medieval Europe did not fail to protect you because no one cared whether you lived. It failed because the systems surrounding your body were too fragile, too crowded, too limited by labor, money, materials, and knowledge to keep waste far from life. The toilet was never just a toilet. It was one visible point in a much larger chain that linked hunger, housing, work, sickness, and survival together so tightly that one weakness fed the next. That is why endurance mattered more than comfort, and luck mattered more than virtue. You could be careful and still fall ill. You could wash, pray, burn herbs, eat cautiously, avoid the visibly sick, and still share a room, a cup, a bench, a blanket, a wall, or a path with danger. Another person might live through worse conditions simply because the right flea never found them, the right cough never reached them, the right cloth never touched their skin. In a world without modern sanitation, medicine, or a clear understanding of infection, Survival often looked less like mastery and more like temporary escape. Yet plague and filth did not pass through Europe without leaving marks deeper than graves. Repeated waves of disease forced towns to think harder about waste, crowding, burial, water, labor, and public order. Communities changed how they watched strangers, treated goods, handled the sick, and remembered the dead. Labor shortages altered the value of work. Belief itself shifted under the pressure, sometimes toward deeper devotion, sometimes toward anger, blame, or disillusionment. The body, once treated as just one part of a fixed social order, became proof that even the strongest system could be humbled by what it could not control. And what remains most haunting is how intimate the danger was. Not on battlefields or in royal courts alone, but in the daily places of touch, the bench, the bowl, the blanket, the privy seat in the dark. Medieval life asks you to imagine a civilization where the body's most ordinary needs never stopped being risky, where relief came mixed with disgust, and where the line between living and dying could run through the simplest act of sitting down. That world was brutal, but it was also human. People kept feeding children, hauling water, emptying pits, saying prayers, cleaning linens, and carrying the weak because there was no other version of life available to them. Their resilience was not beautiful in the polished way later stories like to pretend. It was tired, dirty, frightened, and stubborn. And perhaps that is the final lesson left behind in the latrines of medieval Europe. Human beings can endure almost anything except the illusion that they were ever separate from the frailty of their own bodies.